So I'm just going to move that sound away a little bit. Alright. The joy of portable audio stations. Thanks for coming along and just checking out this preview. I have to do this video as I've been a bit under the weather. Never finished typing up my notes. And there's so much I'm learning about this player, and if you're watching this preview video, it's probably because there's a bit of a shortage of information everywhere regarding these players. I've had to. There's about 3 or 4 videos. If you turn the subtitles on and then get a translator on the subtitles, you can actually watch the 3 videos that might exist on this unit in the market, and they're fascinating to watch. Hang on, I'm just going to turn that down a bit. They're fascinating to watch because you get to learn how these have been batch produced, built to like no price point, like they'll spend anything on it as the concept product, and you actually see how they sold out of the batches that everyone internally that's been seeing the product is just like, yeah, I'll be grabbing that. So they're kind of in short supply, or in the short time that they'll all come to market, they are just a concept product. They're just a bit of a gift to consumers. So probably worth discussing, given that nobody really seems to be talking about them. The last couple of days I've just been doing some tests regarding, I guess, the internal headphone stages in some music players. And I was going through a range of music players there. That's an SE300, Aston Kern SE300. That's an SP2000T. And a couple others. And just trying like in-ear monitors, small sensitive earbuds, versus large over-ears that might be less sensitive. And certainly I'm finding that good headphones scale up in sound quality so much on it that the quality of the amp inside is, well, it's pretty incredible. I mean, we can't really call it the small portable pocket player. It's got nothing in comparison size-wise to the small units. And in audio miniaturisation, or in any technology, miniaturisation costs a lot. You have to buy different grades of componentry every step of the way to get the smaller variant of each component that might measure as well. And when you go large, quite often you can choose more market standard parts, or have a wider range of components to choose between, and then you can be choosing primarily for audio quality first, part selection. But what we do know of the Concept R is that it was hand-tuned by people into very high-end audio, that it was approved by the heads of a company that are all about making the best they can possibly make on the planet, and they'll go and they'll engineer anything to make a better part. And whilst they've always done in-ear monitors, they're branching out a little bit at the moment into, they've now got a couple of electronic parts and a set of over-ear headphones. And what we see is that they've brought their ethos over to these parts, and the collaborations that were required to bring this part to market are huge. So we are talking here KN sourced boards, we are talking here a lot of ear tuning, and the sound comes across as very high quality reference. Now a lot of this stuff might be argued as being subjective, so knowing that and running with it, running a mile with subjectivism, as I said last 3 nights really, going to bed each night, I've been swapping with a range of genres, right? Electronic music can quite often favour Sigma Delta, or Delta Sigma architectures of digital audio conversion, whereas analogue instrumentation, things that need to sound natural, that we have real-world reference to in our heads, is definitely favouring resistor to resistor, or more traditional methods of expensive digital decoding, right? Not the market-friendly Delta Sigma method, where it's cheaper to save money on the chip that measures well, and then spend the money you saved in the conversion stage on better output stages and better digital receiving and a few other aspects of what makes a digital audio converter. And if you make the other aspects of the DAC up-spec'd, you can generally overcome aspects of the actual conversion stage becoming inferior by using a cheaper design. But of course, the real gold standard is to find a digital to analog converter stage that's also paired with a great output stage, and ideally from a company that tunes by ear, not for spec sheet perfection. And just to cover the elephant in the room, the problem with tuning for spec sheet perfection is that you often wind up with a product that when you play it back in your lounge room is quite not musical. And I've tried, in the lowest segment of the market, you find a lot of stuff that sells itself based on spec sheet warfare, because people can read better than they can hear and have more confidence in other people's numbers that are measured using scientific equipment than they have in their own emotional, I guess, appreciation of a piece of music. So some people are brave enough to use their ears exclusively when choosing equipment and have faith in their own ability to trust, I guess, their senses, their feelings. Others would say that that's just mad, that emotions guide purchases is stupid. So I like to ride the middle line a little bit. I have often set up equipment tests with multiple people and fast switching and rotating between a lot of equipment blind, and then having people with golden ears to tell me, okay, well, which row in the concert hall are you sitting in with this particular transport, right? Like keeping all things equal and like showing out a range of DVD players and CD players to see how they perform as transports when passing zeros and ones, because it is true in the consumer sector, a lot of digital audio conversion just relies on, I won't say guesswork, but it relies on a thing called error correction. And error correction, it makes it work, there's no doubt about that. But the more you can get away from error correction, the more accurate you can get that digital stream to be. The tighter and tauter the bass notes will be, the better the soundstage will become, the better the separation of instruments will become. And you can fake a lot of those aspects. You can bass boost a circuit, you can treble etch, the outlines of instrumentation to make it sound a bit sharper or stand out a bit more. And so they're the tuning traits of budget fi, arguably. And once you get past a certain point and building things right, making a good resolving setup that sounds quite neutral and quite natural is the goal. And when you're spending the money on the bill of materials, it can be achieved, and you can do some incredible stuff. And ideally, if you're not wasting that bill of materials buying the shrinking of electronics, you can put in larger batteries and do big voltage swings and don't have to double boost your voltage conversion stage to create the headroom needed for certain headphones, etc. When you can do things at a bigger scale in every step of the way, you don't have to make more compromises that, for example, the little devices make. So, elephant in the room, I've actually been a big fan of shrinking down what was a big bedside setup, using big, dedicated, powerful headphone amps with usually a digital audio player as the transport, but then an external DAC, maybe a three-stage stack beside the bed, and it gets messy. There's lots of power cables, quite often lots of lights. And then when you can shrink that down, you actually get excited. So I do recall grabbing an iFi Diablo and running it off a FIO, I think it was an X3 version, X5 version 3 at the time, and using the coax output on that, and that was a really high quality transport. And the Diablo was quite amazing, and it was more so at the time being able to shrink down a stack. So competition to that would have been things like a Chord Hugo, which is really one of the bargains in the 2010 decade. So somewhere around about 2012 when that came out, it's the benchmark DAC to beat, to the point where even the little baby, the Mojo, had most of its traits, and so in the sub $1,000 sector was certainly one of the DACs to beat. And you can kind of qualify that with who was buying them, who was listening to them, and just about exclusively it was musicians, people who had ear training to understand what natural, lifelike musicians sounded like, instruments sounded like. And they would all go out of their way to get a Mojo, and they would never go back, right? Like, there's just a natural sound recreation in that process. So when I benchmarked the Diablo against the Mojo, there were definitely strengths. I was benchmarking against a Hugo, I should say. And there were strengths in the long tap process and the custom FPGA, or the different type of DAC design that the Hugo or the Mojo is using. And easily favourable. But then it kind of homogenises the sound, arguably. There were times, the classic example I like to give was a particular Tool track where the lead singer, James Maynard Keenan, I think his name is, his vocals are actually in the back of the track in a particular part of a song, and the Mojo was kind of faking it in that it was bringing his vocals forward in the mix, and they were definitely clearer and easier to hear on the Hugo. But the Diablo was the more accurate to the recording, and so sometimes you have to go and you have to have a point reference, and you have to compare. Anyway, it arguably is semantics. Once you get past a certain price point, everything's generally built right, everything sounds right, and we are talking here nuances that the majority of people wouldn't care for. Right? We are talking here about high-end audio, and a scale of diminishing returns that kicks in pretty hard, north of the $1,000 price point. And so that's what's taken many, many hours of comparison, sitting down and listening. Now, I must admit, there is expectations. I didn't expect small, sensitive in-ear monitors to scale very much between them. A small player who might have the driving power for a super sensitive in-ear monitor. Probably what they're built for, probably what they're tuned for. And I expected the playing field on sensitive earbuds to be very close, and then potentially for the bigger electronics with the more powerful amplifier, which I've never utilised because I don't turn the dial up very loud, I would argue. And I expected there to potentially be more scaling, or when I moved to different headphones, I expected there to be a difference that would be more overt or obvious to me. And the reality is, not at all. It's such a better amplifier. And here I am talking the Concept R by Dunu. Such a better amplifier that the way it scales up every piece of headwear I put on it has left me in a real quandary, and hence why this is a preview video. I need to actually send emails off to Dunu. There are so many ways to do digital processing to improve sound quality that the tuning on the Dunu is just so top tier. I seriously question whether they've done it with the actual electronics, or whether they're just doing some advanced DSP stuff to make it always sound the way it sounds. I don't think that's true. I actually do think it is part selection, it's circuit layout, it's design, it's the way that the unit itself, being one piece of metal, and then the electronics put into it, in really, really, really high-end esoteric flagship stuff. They'll use a particular metal in the screws because it'll dampen vibrations differently, which will improve the quality of the pass-through feed of the analog audio. At some level, right? We are talking here, you've got to have a matched set of ancillaries, it's got to all be reference equipment. You've got to put particular tracks on, you've got to listen to particular things, you've got to be able to go, yep, there it is, I can hear the difference. If you're not critically listening, it generally becomes semantics. But it is really nice when a fairly budget piece of equipment, just due to the nature of its build, gets all that stuff thrown in for free. And it does really come across. Anyway, I'm a little all over the place. As I say, I'm quite under the weather. I'm still sort of recovering, but I just want to put this video up because it's going to answer a lot of people's, I guess, present inquiries as to what's going on with this bit of equipment and why it might stand out. And as an example, when I put the Astle & Kern, the AK01s, there's some in-ear monitors. I think they use a planar high-frequency driver, a couple of balanced armatures, and a dynamic driver down the bottom. They're studio tuned. They need about 800 hours for the planar high-frequency unit to kind of break in and for their soundstage to open up. But once you've got 800,000 hours on them, for their money, they're pretty incredible. Now, I'm guessing they've got an electronic crossover, and that's probably what limits their ultimate sound quality versus stuff that's priced twice as expensive in the market. You will get better detail at a higher price point in-ear monitors. So they scale, but there is going to be a ceiling on how far they can scale. to put them on something like this, and then to switch over to something like the SE3, the Dunu is incredible. Now, I better go back a step. I downgraded from the SP2000T. I'm going to go here by price point, right? This here is maybe a sixth in price more expensive than an SE300. More or less in the same price tier. Generally, 3 times the price point of the Dunu, right? So, this here, the SP2000T, has quad DAC chips that I don't really enjoy. I find the only mode in the SP2000T that's enjoyable, that's listenable and honest to the audio recordings, is the tube mode. But the tube mode takes about 30 minutes to warm up and get its sound. At which point, alternating between the SE300 and the SP2000T, they're pretty equivalent, right? You can go to all the effort of building a discrete ladder DAC, or you can just use the world's latest DAC chips and tube the output and fuzz it up a little bit, but give it some warmth. They're mostly the same. If you look at it from the point of view of the subtle differences aren't worth arguing about and paying twice as much money to try to improve, they're pretty much in that ballpark of being akin to each other. But one of the strengths of the SE300 was that the same in-ear monitors didn't require, say, 85 on the volume dial, and that's a scale of 0 to 150. So 85 is just a little bit above the halfway mark. And anybody that's ever owned a range of amplifiers knows that usually around the halfway mark is where they start to sound strained, or bass quality might lessen, become a little bit flabby, or less driver control, etc., etc. And that's certainly what happened, is when I jumped over to the SE300, the same in-ear monitors were achieving the same volume level at about 75 out of 150. But the extra clarity through driver control, because it wasn't in a strained spot on the amplifier, was clearly noticeable. And this is with super sensitive in-ear monitors. So, when jumping up to the Concept R, which has ridiculous amounts of more headphone power in a really nice Class A mode, the soundstage just opened up. The isolation of instruments, the big one I noticed today with the, and harder to drive over ears. These are some Noble Focus Apollos. Scale up beautifully with definitely definitely desktop setup worthy closebacks. And ignore the fact that they have Bluetooth in them. They're actually tuned with a cavity that sounds good, natural, without any DSP needed. So you can feed your wired headphone, your wired setup into them. And wow, they scale up. So this morning I was listening with some propeller heads, His Majesty's Secret Service, I think it is. Might have been history repeating itself. Anyway, in the particular track there was some violins playing probably 30 to 50 feet off to the left in front of us at a diagonal angle, 45 degree angle from the listening position. And on the SE300, which could get the track to the power level it needed at about 120 out of 150, i.e. we expect it to be strained, didn't sound strained, but notice I'm not comparing the bass traits, right, because that would be unfair, right, definitely owned by the device that just didn't have to move its volume dial. Very hard, very high in its run. And so on that particular track, the power in the violins, you could not only isolate each of them here, each of their strings, you could hear the musicians that were playing, you could hear their capability and the way they were leaning into the instrument. There was just so much more to it that was more emotive. So, having benchmarked quite a few times, there's just not a time, there's not one time ever where it's been a parity, right? Not once. It is definitely at least a tier above these units, at a third their cost. Now again, it's not apples to apples. You can't fit this thing in your pocket, right? You can't, it's not possible. So, semantics, right? If you bought a really nice digital audio player and you like it, continue to enjoy it. What I can confirm is that transporting into the SE300 is magic, and they've tuned it for, it's definitely reference equipment. They've tuned it for that sound. It's not market compatible digital. They've set the tolerances really high, and if you feed crappy digital into it, you can just about hear the jitter. When I feed like a Samsung Fold or a Samsung Note phone into it, you could say the blackness of the background drops off, or the greyness kicks in. It's like, no, if you've got ear training, you can hear the little jitter moments, right? It's like a fine veil over the music. And then you jump up to something like a FIO M11 Plus, and the jitter basically drops away. You occasionally hear little, almost clicks and pops, almost, that are happening. But they're kind of big. And then those same clicks and pops just drop right off to being really little when you jump up to something like a more mid-tier Aston Kern player, who have always been known to have pretty good digital output, and that's usually been the reason I wanted to get one. So it's interesting in that it can separate the wheat from the chaff with digital passing in. Now, that being said, firing out of a PC portable using USB into a monitor hub, and then having a cable from that just feed into the USB input at setting 384 kilohertz sampling rate, which is a good sampling rate because 44 kilohertz and 48 kilohertz, or arguably 96 kilohertz, they both multiply neatly into 384 kilohertz. So there's no sampling rate conversion because there's no stepping artifacts. It's a really good target to achieve. Most DACs run at their balls to the walls limit, aren't in their best performance area. So it's just really academic testing. But I set it to 384 kilohertz output on the PC, and using cheap-ish USB cables and bouncing via monitor hubs. And I mean, the background is there. Everything was amazing. To say things like Skyrim sounded epic, you could say, well, YouTube sounds incredible. But it was more a case of how well does it handshake, and just instantly. I've owned a lot of devices where you go into the Windows audio test and you hit the test button, and the amount of the sample you miss, quite often up to half a second, or you even altogether miss the left speaker playing, which is the first speaker to play in the sample test, because the amount of time it takes for everything to handshake and go, oh, I've got a sound to play, and then start playing it, is huge. But the Concept R grabs it so quick, and you can tell it's just a pure, it's just lovely. It really is very high end, and the sound that's coming through is amazing. So I can't really speak about what's inside of it. From what I can see, watching YouTube clips from people who know the designers and trying to get the finger on the pulse of what's going on the inside of it, it's not selling at a consumer price point that is fair. It really should be at twice the price point or higher, and that's probably not factoring the fact they've snuck some really high-end parts into it and then tuned them in ways that again, any other company would, at a minimum, charge twice as much money on it. It's got a sound quality of something that's probably 4 times its price point, if we're comparing it against portable parts, certainly. So, against desktop kit, it is that good. My high-end, my Ultrasound Edition 5s, scaled up so well on it that I literally moved. I use an Audio God R28 as a bedside setup. It's a DAC and a headphone amp combined. So my better setups were generally things running external DACs into things like burst and conductor amp. They punch a little bit above the topping, but not the topping. The Audio God R28, but not enough to really care. And if you're just casually listening, yeah. Anyway, the R28 as a bedside setup, gone. Right, like, using the Concept R and its portability, as you can see here, I've just, these are little portable 15-inch monitors. I'm just using a little table or a tray, and I'm just sitting that, and I'll just walk it in between my home hi-fi, where I feed out via the front jack. I use a nice little Nordos cable, but I just feed it into the AV bypass on a Nate XS3, just a little stereo amp, little integrated amp, and I do all the duties over there. Again, I don't use an external DAC. Now, I use this as a DAC, and I don't use its line out because I like its variable output so well. It's more convenient. It's more convenient for me to have a digital volume slider, more handy for dialing in a specific volume every time. Arguably just being repeatable, scientific in what I'm doing. So, I mean, there's benefits there in usability, but it's just a tactile thing too. It's such a nice volume slider. And so, yeah, just using that into the AV bypass on my amp. I bypass all the electronics in my amp and just get that slightly more pure sound out of it. And so it's great for stereo duties. It's great for bringing it to the bed and either using it with the internal CD player, which is amazing. It requires a DAC of about this price point to equal the digital that's coming off the CDs in there. That is to say, it's a really good CD transport as a CD player. Its price point alone justifies it as a transport, I would just about say. So you can either see the DAC and the headphone amp are free, or I would actually buy it as a DAC for its price point and take the headphone amp and the CD player for free. A lot of ways to look at it, but it's possibly undervalued where it is. You could just say, oh no, audio's always improving, the price is always coming down. Well, if that's the case, this one here is definitely one of the market leaders for that trend. I'd highly encourage people to give it an audition, and certainly if you've got nice headwear that scales up with better equipment, this is your good, one box to rule them all, point of reference that you can hold on to for a decade. You can always come back to, and then you'll just be able to see, is my new equipment really that much better, or is it faking it, right? And you've just got to play some electronica, you've got to play some analog music. Some methods prefer one, other prefer the other. People like myself who listen to a wide genre of musics generally seek an honest system up front. You have to sort your recordings. There are crap recordings out there that will sound poor on an honest reference system. It's better to have a system that reveals them than have a system that glosses over it. Anyway, food for thunk. I'll rapify this out there just so, I guess there's a Western language version of some of the information that's out there. This is definitely a part that they're holding their cards close to their chest. They don't want to tell people what's got into it. I seriously believe these things would be sold out everywhere if more of the information on them was available. So I guess just because they're small batch producing them, and it literally is, it's just like a concept car. It's only to exist as like the Formula Ones, just to prove we can do it and to show that this is what we're capable of. And yeah, it's a real gift to anyone in the meantime who stumbles across them. And if that's you, and you're just, or you're in the process of trying to find out more, thank you for coming along and having a stumble. This video will be replaced with a proper review. The next thing I want to do actually is just feed some line output into the line input on this camera, volume matched, between a few of the devices, including the tube output stage of the SP2000T, and just to give people a chance to compare various ladders. I will also, there'll be 4 devices in that line feed confirmation. One of them will be the Audio Good R28, because it's also a quad board R2R, like I believe the Concept R is, whereas the SE300 is limited to just a dual version. So it leans heavily on the r2r sound that is quite often considered a bit soft, or not as hard hitting as Delta Sigma DACs do with electronica, but not so with the quad board units, right? They kind of get the best of both worlds, and that's the Concept R. You wouldn't at any point be going, this is the DAC architecture of this device. Instead you would just say, oh no, this comes across as flagship reference, right? Because once you get into flagship reference, it doesn't really matter if you're playing with Delta Sigma or R2R. The sound quality is going to have most of the traits of what the best of the best can achieve. And so I think that's what we're playing with here with the Concept R. Anyway, I'll try to put up a video with a feed showing, I guess, 4 different types of technology, and some ways that can fake it until you make it, and other methods that do it in a very pure way and will trip up recordings. And so there will be an analog recording, there will be a digital recording. It should make for a pretty good compare. Anyway, until that time, I say well wishes with you. A great day ahead.